Hey guys, it's Joey, and this is a slightly belated Celtic calling, number 4, and we will be talking about Badb this week. It's a little bit late for all sorts of silly reasons, but we're here, we're gonna do it. So I have notes and things, and also Badb is one of the goddesses I can actually talk about. I consider her to be the crone aspect of the Morrigan, and when we get to the end of the video, by the power of editing, we will shuffle over there and we will have a look at the Badb section on the mini altar down below, because I've set up the mini altar now, so that's her aspects and the bigger altar is overarching. And that way we can have a look at some of the things I use to symbolise Badb, relationship with Badb and all that good stuff. Okie dokie. Badb is considered to be a battle fury. Disguised as a hooded crow, her shrill cries heralded dooms for warriors. She is a banshee, a battle fury and a prophetess. As the gentle crone, she guides souls to the other worlds, rest and rebirth. With one foot in the mortal realm and the other in the realm of spirits, she holds the gift of prophecy and prophetic speech. Her name means crow or one who boils. Battlefields were once referred to as the land of Badb, and one of her other names, I think it's Caith Badb or Badb Cartha, means battle crow. The second translation of her name, one who boils, refers to the cauldron, and we've discussed the cauldron before, and this is kind of nice how it follows on from Bran last week, because the cauldron is symbolic of the womb of the goddess, as well as being a prophetic device for seeing into the future, a transmutation device of magic, of things becoming something else, and then connected with the other world that way. This is interesting. The Celts believed the world would end when her cauldron boiled over, its contents spilling across the earth and destroying all life. Most of this initial information is from Woodfield's book. According to the Cormac's Glossary, she was the wife of the war god Niet, as was Navon, and there is the crossover with Navon, of course. With her being a battle fury, then crossing her names over in the tin. They compared them to be the same. They were both supposed to be married to Niet, and they both had this vocal call in battle, but Badb's heralds death, like the banshee of later folklore. The screams and cries are predictions of death rather than causing death, which was in the case of Navon. She watched over warriors as a crow and often wandered across battlefields in the shape of a wolf. The connection is likely to be because both animals could be found scavenging for food on battlefields. I love this idea. It's kind of... okay, I don't love this idea. Bear with me. By consuming the flesh of fallen warriors, these animals were symbolically ingesting the warrior's essence. Gathering souls in animal form, therefore, she was bringing them to the underworld for rebirth. She was nomming down their souls as animals. But I like the idea of the transference of energy. The wheel of life, circle of life type thing. The circle of life. Also worth mentioning here, apart from my apparent nuttiness and Lion King-esque references, is the wolf connection. For a long time I had, and still do, I had 3 wolf spirit guides, and the wolf thing never really made sense in terms of the Celtic connections. I always thought, well, you know, I don't understand how this connects, and this is how it connects, through Badb, through her wolf form. Her connections to prophecy are several. She appears as the washer at the ford. If you saw the washer at the ford, which was I believe it's usually an elderly woman, but not always, washing blood-stained clothes as you were going to battle, then that means you're gonna die in battle. Okay, I'm not gonna be able to pronounce that. In the Tochmach, a story that dates back to the 10th century, she appears to Queen Maeve and the Ulster king Conchobar by predicting death and warning against disaster. She tells Maeve that her son will be killed and encourages her to take up arms. When Badb appeared in King Conchobar's dream, she predicts the conflict of the Tín several years before the raid began, perhaps giving the chance to avoid disaster. Both describe her as a young woman, a white lady fair with brilliancy. Similarly, in the destruction of the Cocoa's hostel, a story composed around the 9th century, Badb is described as pale and red-mouthed. Both white and red are connected to the other world as well as the realm of the Fae, and white was connected to death and mourning. Da, 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 da. Cuchulainn encounters Badb in her washer at the ford form, whilst he is travelling with a druid who warns him about the death omen. Oh, she was a young girl. They saw a young girl, thin and white-skinned, having yellow hair, washing and ever washing and wringing out clothes that were stained crimson red, and she was crying and keening all the time. Do you see what that young girl is doing? It is your red clothes she is washing and crying as she washes because she knows you are going to your death. From Gregory Cuchulainn of Mythem. Yada 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 yada. Okay, before we go on to that bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about the washer at the ford bit and the prophecy bit. When I was first looking for who my matron goddess was, the ritual before, the Sabbat before, I'd actually found this phrase, washer of the ford, and been incredibly drawn to it without knowing why, without knowing what it meant or where it was connected to. It resonated with me, and it was one of the signs of the coming of Morrigan, basically. Okay, this is weird and interesting. In the story, this destruction of the Durga's hostel, Badb appears to King Conair, who broke all but one of his guys through a series of strange events, that sort of vows that you really shouldn't break. She appeared at his door as a hideous hag and asked for his hospitality. His remaining gaze was not to admit a single female into his house after sunset. He reluctantly allowed her to enter, breaking his final gaze, and Badb prophesied the king's death. By morning he was dead. Prior to her encounter with the king, she also appeared as a ghostly spectre on the hostel's roof. In this story, she seems to be making her prophecy a reality rather than predicting truths. Whilst most would presume the Phantom Death Messenger would appear as a crone, she often appears as both a maiden and a crone. When Badb appears to those who have broken her geis or have participated in wrongdoing, she appears as a hag. To the brave warriors she favours, often appears young and beautiful. And of course, the interconnected relationship of the Morrigan and her aspects. I often describe her, because of her shape-shifting nature, she's often in flux, often in flow. All of the three aspects run into one another. They're not, you know, as Maiden Mother Crone, they're not as defined, they're not as singular, they all sort of flow into one another, and that's one of the complicated things about the Morrigan and her shapeshifter energy. She's more connected to water than the other two aspects of the Morrigan. She washes the clothes in the rivers, as we have discussed, tends the waters of the otherworldly cauldron of rebirth, and destroys the world with the boiling waters of the cauldron. Which is also good because we discussed rivers last week with Bran. Offerings to the god were often thrown into rivers and holy wells to ensure their entrance to the other world. Water from holy wells sprang forth deep within the earth, connecting them to the underworld. Correspondences: white, red, dark blue, juniper, holly, Solomon's seal, onyx and jet, new moon, waning moon, dusk, winter, fall, crow and wolf. Okay, so that is some information, and now we will just talk, I think. So that's my referencing texts and bits and pieces, and now we're going to just talk about my experiences. After I wiggle my backside out of the sleep it's gone into. Ooh, good. Right, okay. Whew. So Badb is actually the aspect of the Morrigan that I connect with the most easily. I can't tell you fully why this is, apart from the Morrigan in what I consider to be her whole form, because she shows up in many different forms, and the easiest way I can describe it is the differences between physicalities. If she shows up as Badb, and I have touched on this here and there in other videos, but I've seen her both as a crone and a maiden aspect. I've seen both. And I've seen her as a ferocious crone and as a kinder, sort of more gentler crone. And when she showed up as the maiden, she's had long white or long silver white hair, very sensual, bright red lips. I actually have, I've said this before, but I have a picture on my Facebook Morrigan album, which I keep as sort of like an online dedication of art to her, because I found this picture and it looks just like Badb when Badb showed up, apart from the lips are wrong because Badb's lips were red. And this is before I knew anything about her, supposedly having these bright red lips and things. And I've seen her show up as half skeletal and crone-like, and I've seen her as a more caring grandmother of divination type figure. Why I connect to crone energy most easily is anybody's guess. I've always been a bit like this. I can connect to older people more easily than people who are younger or my own age. Excuse me. I connect quite well with the correspondences of hers. You know, I have a real interest in divination and things like that. And the death aspect has always been the one that I connected to most easily and never had very much of a fear of. It's the connections of life, death and rebirth always made a lot of sense to me. I've had a lot of crow interactions in my time so far with the Morrigan, and although you can say the crow is connected to all of the aspects of the Morrigan and her in her, excuse me, her in her whole form, Badb is the one where it's most easily connected to. As yet I haven't had any dire warnings, any prophetic dire warnings, but I do get messages and things to consider, and it's usually Badb when it's those sorts of messages, not always. I've had messages from both Macha and Anu and the Morrigan in her whole form, if you like, but usually when getting messages it is Badb that comes forth and says these things. And with her prophetic nature, this of course does make a lot of sense to me. And prophetic words, especially in the form of poems and prose and language, and the power of the voice, which we touch on again with Badb having the I don't know, death scream, I guess, the warning of death, is a really powerful thing. And it draws me back to talking about the power of the spoken word. And the Celts believed strongly in their oral tradition. You know, if you wrote things down, they lost their power. Whereas I don't feel quite so strongly about that, because I enjoy the written word just as much as the spoken word. And the documentation of my magical path helps me to see the patterns and work through them and all that sort of thing. The power of the word and the call and the, you know, singing and talking, and the power of energy that we put into something to talk about it is very potent. And we often forget the power in words, how much they can harm, how much they can heal, just from letting them fly from our lips, literally. And Badb reminds us of that. The power of her word is that death will occur. And then in the other breath, she teaches us that that is not necessarily the thing to fear. You know, dishonour would be far more of a thing to fear from Badb than death itself, because of course she shows us of the cauldron of rebirth and the cycles of life, and it's not the end. Dishonour, however, is something that Badb clearly punishes, in that her breaking of the geis of the king of, I can't pronounce his name, and showing up as her haggard ghostly form, predicting his death, and then he dies. And that, to me, is tied into the concept of dishonour being worse than the concept of death, and her being quite saddened to predict the death of those she considers to be honourable warriors. Her connection to the cauldron of water is sort of interesting, as it also links her back to Bran, and Bran being the male counterpart to her in that, you know, if you, in at least the way I have interpreted things and have interacted with things, Bran being the sage and her being the crone. And they both have the cauldron, they both have the magical aspect, they both have all the rivers and the water flowing through, and the other world being connected by water. And water is often a really incredible healing element, because it sort of delves in a symbolic way into our psyche and into our realm of our emotions. So water for me is what I take to the most potent healing spells. And if you consider death within a death cycle within a life, so like a death of something rather than a physical death, and I've talked about death cycles before and made videos about death cycles, they're really, really healthy, generally speaking. And you can consider it like the death card in tarot again, and certain things do need to die in order for us to be reborn within our lifetime, and Badb teaches us that, you know, to let go of that no longer serves, to cut off what poisons us, to not engage with things, whatever they may be, that have harmed us in the past, to not keep repeating the same lessons that we should already know, that don't keep making the same mistakes, don't keep doing that same thing which hurt you, don't keep trusting the wrong people, don't keep, I don't know, engaging in destructive patterns, because you're behaving dishonourably and you need to put those things to rest rather than behave in a dishonourable manner. We're coming full circle, it's making sense. Very good. Okay. As her maiden form, Badb has been the most sensual aspect busty and curvy and not wearing very much. I was like, okay. Whereas Anu tends to be more warrior maiden, very, very pure, very, you know, she can be quite light and frolicky, or she can turn up in her battle maiden form. Badb was just out there like, hello. And that's why I shared the picture on Facebook. I was like, that's pretty much how she looked. She wasn't wearing very much. I'm getting an image in my mind now because I've said it. Thanks for that. Badb as the maiden is likely to show up and jiggle. She has this great sexual energy, this sensuality, this power of maidenhood, this I am who I am firm in myself, literally. And I'm proud and I take power in my femininity and my sexuality, and that's what she teaches us in maiden form. And whole videos could be made on the links between death and sex. Vampires alone, you know, and the sensuality and the sexuality between these two things is well documented, so I'm not going to go on at length about that. But that's why her maiden form is so sensual compared to Anu's, who is still beautiful, but her energy is completely different from the energy of Badb in her maiden form, and she really does have that self-empowerment within roles of sexuality, particularly feminine sexuality. I mean, granted, this is my experience, so of course it's feminine, but she really does reinforce that, you know, to try and bolster your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your rights, perhaps, as a woman, to engage in sexuality without a sense of guilt. And Badb really does drive that energy home, for me anyway. I mean, other people may have different experiences, but it makes me giggle even thinking about it, because she's just basically like, think Jessica Rabbit on a goddess level. Basically. She's laughing at me. Okay. But again, you know, having fun with yourself, but at the same time behaving honourably and respecting yourself. So it's the balance, you see. Is there anything else we need to cover? We've sort of covered prophetic and speech things, and I can't really go into any predictions or anything because they'll all be personal. She's obviously the aspect that's possibly most appropriate to call in terms of divination. If you really needed answers and needed her to help you see into the future, or at least ascertain a better understanding of yourself to help you go forward, to help you put certain things to death, particularly in bad habit type situations. Like, I need this situation to end, I need to stop doing this, I need to figure out what I need to do to become who I need to be, rather than So she's definitely that energy, definitely. So I think we've covered everything that I can think of, and I'm gonna ping the camera off and go over there, and we will show the Badb corner of the mini altar. Okay, so as promised, this is the Badb corner of the downstairs altar, if you like. Now I have her crone cauldron, which I make, and I will move that out of the way, but we'll have a quick look. It's just how I interpret crone herbs and things and stones that I work with. So there's a dark amethyst circle. All of the goddess aspects have a circle around their cauldron because of the circle being so symbolic and rich, and amethyst being my spirit stone, which I connect with deity most easily through. And hers is dark for the crone aspect. So we have a raven skull, a key, a shark tooth, a spearhead in bloodstone, a garnet, an amethyst, a smoky quartz cluster, a citrine, an obsidian, a dark shell, a Picasso jasper, and a smoky quartz, seer stone or dragon's egg, depending on where you're from. So certain of these crystals, and a crow feather, trimmed down crow feather we should say, certain bits of these are in each corner, so each has their own amethyst, each has their own garnet, each has their own arrowhead, but Badb's is darker. The smoky quartz is for the divinational aspect, helping connect with the prophetess side. I've always connected really easily with smoky quartz, and it does have that divination aspect, as does the seer stone. Literally seer stone, so, you know, it connects to her prophetess aspect. Everybody has a Picasso jasper. The grey, black and white made me think of crows. They all have their own obsidian and citrine. And then the dark shell is for the darker aspect of Badb. Keys are symbolic of skeleton keys, opening doors, going through to the other world. The raven skull is reasonably obvious. Death aspect. They all have that because it's just so Morrigan-y. And the shark's tooth reminds me that, you know, the goddess has bite. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and many blessings.